So please state your name for the record.
Ian Prittie.
Tell us a little bit about your background, Ian.
I am originally an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a family manufacturing and engineering business.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went on to financial services, so I became an equity analyst. And now I do project management in the financial sector.
That's great. That's great. And what inspired you to join the People's Party?
I very much believe in the idea of limited government.
Yeah.
It's something that I think we desperately need.
Mm-hmm.
We've had ridiculous deficits, ridiculous debt. I think we've had a focus on non-economic immigration, which I think is very harmful to the country.
Mm-hmm.
There are all kinds of businesses around the country who are looking for skilled labor that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, that's great. And how's it been going with campaigning and stuff? How's that been going and stuff?
It's been very good.
Yeah.
We've had a good reception at the doors.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest challenge we're running into is people don't know the party, but I think when they do find out about the party, they're enthusiastic about it.
Mm.
They want to see the platform. They ask good questions. It's a really good riding. Don Valley West. There's very high education level. They have a lot of very good questions for us. So it's been great.
Yeah. And what's the question you started gotten the most from people, just in regards to what is your platform for Don Valley West? What can you do to make the lives better here in Don Valley West?
Well, our platform for everywhere is the same, and that's one of the features of our party is we don't pander to specific areas or groups. We bring the same platform to everybody. So there's nothing specific for the riding. But we will balance the budget in 2 years. There are people obviously very concerned about the fiscal management over the last 4 years. And that's going to allow us to reduce tax pretty dramatically. Mm-hmm. So we will abolish capital gains tax, which is a big thing in this riding. If someone's earning under $100,000, they'll pay 15% flat rate as an employee.
Yeah.
So we're reducing the marginal brackets down to 2 from the current 5. And we're also getting rid of, we're going to get rid of foreign aid. So $8 billion was spent in 2018, which predominantly goes to African dictatorships and is generally wasted overseas. The more that we can increase the savings rate for Canadians, the more money that they'll have in their pockets, and then they'll be in a position to donate what they want with their own decisions in terms of how they want to contribute.
That's great. So what are you going to do about healthcare, let's say, here in Don Valley West? Is there any ideas that you have for healthcare here at all or anything? What is the party's stance sort of on healthcare?
We want to reform the Canada Health Act so that the provinces are then in a position to innovate. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the best delivery around the world in countries like Switzerland and Germany, and strangely enough, Ukraine as well. The waits very good. Yeah. And the wait times are very low, and the way they do that is it's a mix of private and public delivery, and that's what we need to get to because that's what the evidence shows works. So we want to get out of the province's way. Our contention is that the Canada Health Act is an illegal interference into the provincial jurisdiction. Yeah. It's a province's responsibility to deliver healthcare properly for its citizens. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that that's reformed and give the provinces the best chance to reduce wait times and reduce costs.
That's great. And so what about foreign policy? I know that may be a big question, but what about foreign policy of the People's Party? What's that sort of? Because I've read online that you believe in withdrawing from the UN or bringing down Canada's sort of participation in the UN down to a minimum. So what about foreign policy of Canada?
We would not. We're not in any way proposing to leave the United Nations. I think it's very critical to have a seat at the United Nations.
Yeah.
we definitely want to make some changes to our relationship with the with them. One is, if you look at the main parties, they are attempting to secure a UN Security Council seat.
Yeah.
We don't believe that that's the correct direction. We also will withdraw from the Global Compact on Migration.
Yeah.
That's the one where we have basically ceded our foreign policy and direction to the United Nations. We believe very strongly that policy should be voted on by Canadians and should be owned by Canadians.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, and that gets us back to being able to have a decision with our own citizens about how immigration in particular should work.
So in terms of electoral reform, is your party going to do anything?
We haven't stated anything formally on electoral reform, but it is something that a number of members probably would propose. That's the other unique thing about our party, is that it's not a dictatorship from the top. The MPs will be free to bring forward motions that they want.
Anything that they want,
and we will have free votes on those. So undoubtedly, I would think on that issue, since it was a promise that the Liberals made and didn't deliver on, that it clearly there's a lot of interest in doing that. First, my personal opinion, first past the post is not a wonderful system. So I think you will see people bring that forward.
That's great to hear. So have you met Maxime Bernier personally, or
many times?
Many times. And what's he like in person?
Very charismatic. I think, I've been in multiple rooms where, going back to even the by-election and before, like in York Simcoe back in February, where we'll typically be in a room with anywhere between 30 and 40, and sometimes many more, 100 or 200 people. And he brings a lot of energy. He brings we think that the platform, obviously, we believe in, but he's a very charismatic guy, and I think people are very attracted to not only the party message, but how he delivers it as well.
So does the party have any particular stance on environmental issues, or do they believe that man-made climate change or against man-made climate change?
Well, the climate is absolutely changing. There's no question about that. We have a little bit of a concern with the alarmism that's going on, because carbon dioxide, for example, the Paris agreements, the two main parties have no chance of getting to those targets. And we don't actually, from my personal perspective, and I think this would generally be pretty consistent across the party, it's very questionable whether carbon dioxide is a problem. What never gets reported on the media is the extreme cold environments that are occurring around the world. So Australia's just had probably their worst winter they've ever had. We had the coldest spring in Ontario in 52 years. South America right now is so cold that it's affecting their crop production, with multiple goods falling between 7 and 19% year over year in terms of delivery. And those things don't get reported on the news because, in my opinion, the news only focuses on variances to the warm side. So we reject the alarmism. We certainly reject the idea that there should be carbon tax. Carbon tax is something that has just made the cost of living more expensive for every Canadian, whether you drive or not. So 4.4, and even if you don't drive, the cost of everything you buy is obviously being transported, and it just makes life less and less affordable, which is a huge problem the country faces right now.
That's great. So in terms of other policies, the other one that comes to mind that I can think of is sort of economic policy. So what else would your party do? So Maxime Bernier wants to get rid of protectionism in regards to the dairy industry. So what would he do to make the Canadian economy better?
So starting with supply management, I mean, Canadian consumers are being cheated to the tune of almost $4 billion a year. They're overpaying for dairy, and they're overpaying for poultry. And that's because the main parties want to appeal to a very small special interest group that encompasses approximately 19,000 farmers at the expense of 37 million Canadians. And so our view is that we would like to transition the agricultural sector away from supply management. There are multiple countries that have already done this. They've demonstrated it can be done responsibly and successfully. So in no way will we leave our farmers out in the cold. We will pay them back for their quotas that they had to buy, and work with a multi-year plan to transition them off it. It's been done successfully in New Zealand and Australia.
That's great. So do you also bring in more private healthcare, let's say, into Don Valley West to help deal with healthcare?
That is up to the provinces to decide. But we want
okay.
to get the Canada Health Act out of the way and stop holding them hostage, because right now the current situation is basically what the federal government is doing is saying you can have revenue as long as you follow our conditions. And the provinces right now, the reason that there's hallway medicine and long wait times is because the province has a monopoly over the delivery. We need to look at what works around the world and get to a place that has a mix of private and public delivery, because that's what's shown to have the least wait times and the least cost.
That's great. Another question that I have is sort of in relation to oil pipelines. Is the party for oil pipelines, or?
Yeah, so we would make use of the charter powers that under Section 9210 that basically mandate that when a project has federal interest, there's the ability of the federal government to insist that it happens. So right now, the United States, frankly, has conducted a campaign to landlock Alberta's oil, which has cost Alberta north of 100,000 jobs. And it's been a very sort of subversive campaign.
Yeah.
There was Tides Foundation was involved in the last election. So the influence of foreign money is a big concern, and we would. It's also not, frankly, if people are concerned about pollution, and certainly I am. The idea that the oil has to basically travel to the southeast of the United States and then travel all around the world to get to Asia.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes a lot more sense to get it to British Columbia in the case of Trans Mountain.
Yeah.
Energy East. There's also the Atlantic provinces want to be able to pursue the energy projects that they would like, which will vastly increase employment there.
Yeah.
And they need Quebec to stop blocking it. So our position is that we would use the federal authority to ensure that those projects can get done. There's nothing that interferes with them, and that will lead to a resurgence in job creation and our ability to get our products to world markets.
That's great. So in terms of dealing with the United States, would you try and seek a better NAFTA deal, or what does your party think about dealing with President Trump?
He's obviously presented an incredible challenge to really every country in the world. I mean, this is obviously a very unusual presidency. I'm very concerned with his direction on tariffs. If you look at the current sort of dispute, let's say, with China, negotiations that are going on. He seems to, what seems to happen is when he gets upset, he thinks that the path is to apply more and more tariffs. That's actually completely counter to what our party is trying to achieve. So, for example, on interprovincial trade barriers, the two parties will not do anything about fixing it, and it's costing the Canadian economy a tremendous amount of money per year. The estimates are incredibly high. It's $10,000 per family or something. So we visited multiple businesses that, to use one example, a cider manufacturer in Bolton, Ontario, and I specifically asked him about interprovincial trade, and he's done a great job establishing his market in Ontario, but the tariffs are so high to send his goods to other provinces, and there are all these other restrictions, like he can't sell to Quebec unless he uses Quebec apples. It's ridiculous, right? So we want to assign a minister to interprovincial trade and start really working with the provinces to reduce those barriers so that we don't have any internal trade friction. And the same thing would apply internationally. We would go to the president and every other country we're trying to deal with and really encourage a freer trade path. Right now with the United Kingdom, the U.S. is in the process of signing a trade deal with them. We should be too, but we left them hanging because we're hoping the Liberals seem to be hoping Brexit won't happen, or
guess
or
what's
whatever.
happening.
Yeah. So, but a free we should actually. What I would eventually like to do is do what Singapore did, which is unilaterally drop all tariffs, because that's, again, what the evidence shows leads to the most amount of economic success. When they were kicked out of Malaysia in 1965, they unilaterally got rid of almost every single tariff that existed, and now they have more GDP per person than almost any country, more equality than any other country, And they also don't have minimum wage, by the way. They've had all the success and a lot of equality, and it's counter to what a lot of people have been told, but that's what the evidence shows works.
So your party would not be in favor of the 15 minimum wage dollar.
That is a provincial issue, so that's up to the provinces to decide. But again, I would point out that the regions in the world that don't have minimum wage have more equality and higher GDP per person. And the other thing, in my opinion too, coming from an engineering background and a company that actually did automation, is that what you'll see is if minimum wage continues to cause business a problem, you'll see more and more automation, and all it's going to do is put more people out of work.
So what does your party seek to do with Indigenous people, let's say, for example? What would your party try and do?
We are developing a plan for that. That's an area that frankly the country has never got right in its entire history. It goes back to even John A. Macdonald referring to our Indigenous people as savages. It's disgraceful. They're in a position where they can't pursue their economic interests. There are problems like there are no private property rights that are assigned on a number of most of the reserves, so that they're unable to even get a mortgage on their houses. So our formal plan on that is not out yet. But much like what we've done with veterans and every other plank we've had, we think it will be very well received. I personally would very much like to get rid of the Indian Act. I think it's racist.
Oh,
I think it's disgraceful, and it's a very dark spot on the country's history. But because the official policy is not out yet, I'm
you
not
can't
able
comment
to,
on it. Yeah. But the official policy on multiculturalism is out, so your party's in favor of scrapping the official Multiculturalism Act. So what do you think they want to do with multiculturalism?
To understand that, you have to go back to how it was first put in place in the first place. And the intention with that was, if you look at how Trudeau wanted to move away from Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights and create the Charter, his main focus was around French language delivery around the country, which we should have, right? Like everybody should be able to get government services in both official languages. It's pretty reasonable. But our view is that what the country needs is unity. We need to focus on what makes us Canadian, not what divides the country. And I think funding multiculturalism encourages division and encourages identity politics, both of which we disagree with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we get back to being Canadian first, and that applies to everybody. It makes no difference what your skin color is or how new or old to the country you are. We want to focus again on being Canadian.
That's great. Yeah. Another question that I sort of have is, so you have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Would your party be in favor of that or against that?
There were multiple things in that deal that I don't like. Coming from a background that revolved a lot around intellectual property, my feeling of that agreement is that it continues to keep Canada in a place where we're almost seen as only being able to produce raw goods and commodities, and we're never able to do anything beyond that.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think it's not particularly good for the development of research and development.
Yeah.
It's not particularly good for Canada being seen as a first world proper nation with a modern economy. We don't just cut down trees and extract oil and metals. We have a lot of very smart entrepreneurs doing a lot of great intellectual property, so I would have preferred to see that agreement focus more on intellectual property and how we might protect that. So, of course, the U.S. withdrew from that, and I think much like every other trade negotiation, it's a chance to look at that again and see if we can't come up with a better deal.
Yeah.
It should revolve around free trade primarily.
So another question I have is related to Arctic sovereignty. So I saw an article myself recently saying Russia is going to interfere in our election to mess with our Arctic sovereignty. So what will your party do to protect our sovereignty in the Arctic?
I think we can safely assume that Russia and maybe others, possibly China, will actively be looking to interfere with this election. I think it'd be very naive to believe that foreign interests wouldn't try to do that. We need to have a very strong response and be quite hawkish with Russia in particular. The Northwest Passage will potentially be a trade route at some point, and we have to make very sure that we maintain our sovereignty on that. So that's going to revolve around diplomacy, which will be very important. It's going to mean that our military needs to be very engaged in that and have a clear plan to let Russia know that they can't interfere with our sovereignty. So That's something that I've been very concerned about with the current government.
Yeah.
I don't think they're taking it seriously. And Russia will take advantage of us if we're not smart about it.
Yeah. So in terms of veterans, I know I'm kind of going all over the place here, but in terms of veterans, what is your party going to do? What about veterans here and Don Valley West in particular? Because we have up at Sunnybrook, you have the whole veterans wing there. What is your party going to do to make things better for veterans? Because I feel like they're also mistreated here in our country.
Well, the treatment of veterans has been absolutely disgraceful. And both traditional parties are at fault because in 2006 under Harper, basically, to make a long story short, what's happened is there are now multiple classes of veterans, and what I mean by that is the compensation they look at if they're injured and then on disability. And so we had our national conference in Gatineau several weeks ago, and we were actually able to introduce our veterans platform at the time. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that that all veterans are treated equally and they get a proper amount of money. They get the proper monetary compensation that they need.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that our veterans would be homeless or struggling for money is absolutely insane. And that's frankly one of the reasons we need to get back to a position of fiscal responsibility, because we do need to take care of our most vulnerable. And the only way you can do that without running into a serious fiscal problem is if you get to balance, and then we'll be able to take care of our veterans. But what we're going to make, we brought up an example at the conference where two of our veterans were injured at approximately the same time. They had the same classification of injury, and because of the different times of application process, one receives something like $525 a month, and the other receives over $2,000, which is ridiculous.
Unfair. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. So everyone needs to be brought up to the top level. You had Trudeau, of course, say that veterans are asking for more than we can give, which is frankly,
it's unfair,
disgraceful.
Yeah.
And so we have by far the best platform on veterans, and I'm very proud of it.
That's great. So in terms of balancing the budget, what will your party do exactly to balance the budget?
Very important question. So the main things are we will get rid of foreign aid, which again, through multiple studies, we believe is basically going to dictators and really going through a corrupt process and achieving very little around the world. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, we're paying China to develop their economy with like no demonstrable benefits to Canadian business, while they kidnap our citizens for no reason. We are going to get rid of crony capitalism. So there'll be no more SNC-Lavalin. There'll be no more funding for Bombardier. There'll be no more $12 million to Loblaws for freezers. We are going to get rid of that. And those two items combined, along with the infrastructure bank, will get us past $13 billion. So that will put us in an excellent position to reduce tax for everybody, starting right at the bottom, where we can increase the savings rate of people, make conditions great again for small business, and really get employment going again. So those are the main factors.
Yeah. So speaking of China and the detained citizens, what would you do in relation, in particular, dealing with China? Let's say.
I would take a number of escalating steps from a very hawkish position in order to get them to understand that what they've done is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
So, to begin with, I would kick the ambassador out. And I would also ban Huawei from any participation in Canada's 5G infrastructure build that's coming. There are multiple reasons to do that, not just because they're mistreating us and our citizens, but because I think there's a very strong security risk as well. I mentioned the Asian Infrastructure Bank. There's no reason in a million years we should be paying an economy to grow itself when there's no benefit to Canadian business that's ever been demonstrated. And Canada also there's a revolving board seat at the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that frankly I would resign from.
You would resign from.
And if those 4 steps didn't work, I would stop all imports until they release our kidnapped prisoners.
Another question that I have is sort of dealing with Europe. So you're dealing with post-Brexit.
Yep.
UK, would your party seek a new trade agreement with the UK? But what do you make it favorable to Canadians?
Absolutely. So the backbenchers in the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom had a plan back in March when which of course was the original Brexit timeframe, to unilaterally drop tariffs on almost 90% of the tariffs that they now apply. And in part, they did that because they were there's clearly going to be a bit of a blip as they transition away from the agreement into this being part of the EU. But the main reason to do it is because, as I mentioned earlier, as Singapore showed, having no tariffs is the correct path economically. And so the UK has a plan to do that, and frankly, we're leaving them hanging right now. I would immediately, especially given our historical relationship, I think there should be a free trade agreement between the two countries that has no tariffs, and I think that's the place that we should get to.
So what do you think, so speaking of our historical relationship with the United Kingdom, people are taking down statues of Johnny MacDonald, which kind of has me like, why are you doing that? Because he is a historical figure in your country. What do you think of trying to reconcile with Indigenous people and trying to find a way where we can both honor our history, but also say sorry, we're sorry we did all these horrible things? How can we honor our history at the same time, but not whitewash it?
It's an excellent question, because I mentioned earlier that that the countries never got that relationship right, and Johnny MacDonald did refer to them as savages, which is a very tough thing, obviously, to get right. But I think what matters is not to suggest that history doesn't matter. What matters is getting it right going forward and treating them all going forward. We can't do anything about what took place, in the 1860s, but we certainly can get it right today. And I think that's what matters. I don't know that every single aspect of our history should be deleted and replaced. I don't entirely agree with that, although I certainly understand the position of the people who have that view and why they have that view. But I think the focus should be on us having a really superb platform for our Aboriginal people, and really do something that the traditional parties will not do. They've shown for 152 years they're unable to get it right. I want to abolish the Indian Act and take a number of other reforms where they would be in control of their own destiny again.
Yeah. So, in terms of your party's policy on free speech, what is it? What do you promise to do with that?
Well, if you look at our fundamental rights, and again, I'd go back to Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights, which I'm a very big fan of. You have the right to peaceably assemble. The press has the freedom to write what it wants. People have the right to express themselves.
Yeah.
Those. If you look at the countries where that's been taken away, it leads to a very, very dangerous and scary situation. So China, of course, amongst many other countries, you will be detained if you say something that the government has a problem with. We can't take these things lightly. I think that I believe that people, especially in a political sense, are entitled to whatever view they want, as long as it doesn't contravene our criminal code, obviously, with regards to hate. But I think what we've seen people label things as hate speech, which are not even approaching hate speech. I mean, hate speech is very clearly defined in the criminal code. And if you're inciting violence against a group, or you're clearly expressing racism, obviously that passes the threshold of something that would clearly be a problem. But what we're seeing now is things, just simple political disagreements being labeled as hate speech, and that cannot happen. Our view is that, as an example, I'm a limited government person. If someone's let's say an NDP sort of type, and they believe that government should be involved in a lot more, it would never even occur to me that they're not allowed to have that opinion or express that opinion. They absolutely are, but we need to be able to as well. We have a unifying message for all Canadians. We have candidates from every background imaginable. We have candidates who are gay. We have candidates we have Muslims running with every religion. It's just this idea that people are referring to us as Nazis is just utterly misinformed and extremely disingenuous.
Yeah. So speaking of universities and freedom of speech, so something that the Ford government's also proposed is to withdraw funding from universities that quote unquote don't allow for freedom of speech. So what would you do in universities in terms of freedom of speech?
I agree with that approach. I think there's clearly been a big problem on campuses restricting freedom of speech. If you look at the Lindsay Shepherd affair, the way she was treated was an abomination. The problems that Jordan Peterson ran into were an abomination. If you look at what a university is supposed to be doing, it's supposed to be encouraging the people who go there to think for themselves and then be able to express themselves. So they should be given different points of view, and then it's up to them to decide what they think is appropriate. If you're only presenting one side of an argument, then people aren't able to hear diverse views, and I think that's very important for intellectual thought and for the development of students. And that's what those institutions are supposed to be doing, not just having one particular view and disregarding all others.
So coming back to Don Valley West, a big issue that I've heard from myself and from other people is the development of condos. So development of condos here, do you think there's too many condos going into Don Valley West or within Lisa?
There's a massive project planned on the IBM lands, like so down at Wesley, and it's like very, very significant, and would actually probably lead to a rezoning of the riding, because there is so many. I've forgotten the number. I would get it wrong, but it's an absolutely. When you think about the idea that typically ridings these days have about 70 or 80,000 constituents, it would radically change it, and would probably mandate a rezoning of the electoral boundaries in the GTA. And so it's a tough question, because you have when a city is growing rapidly, developers look for more density. We want to make sure that housing supply is never part of the problem with regards to cost of living. So a lot of people want to come to Toronto, but I think in part that's why we have to look at the immigration levels to make sure that it's managed correctly, so that there's a manageable pace of growth for how we do this. And I think it needs to be looked at responsibly. A lot of it falls to the municipality and their decisions on zoning, but more and more people will clearly want to live here, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question that I have, this is a personal one for me, what will you do to improve access for mental health within Don Valley West?
Well, again, that's a critical issue, and actually there's a local debate. There's a local debate on that on healthcare too. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. I think again it's we want to get the Canada Health Act out of the way so that provinces can do much better delivery. I think the reason, if you have the provinces having a monopoly over it, that's the reason that services can't be provided. That's what leads to the budgets exploding. That's what leads to very long wait times. So I think if we could improve these situations, there would be more funding available to focus on things like mental health, so that people would get the right delivery.
And then in terms of more things within Don Valley West, will you do anything in terms of education reform for your party, or?
That is a provincial issue, so we would leave it to the province.
So you leave it to the provinces. Yep. So you do kind of American style thing with it, so that's another question that I sort of have is related to. I can't think of any more questions that I have. Another question that I have is, what would you do with the CBC? So would you defund it, or would you fund it?
In the United States, so if you look at National Public Radio and the public broadcasting system, they've been successfully able to raise private funding and have good programming that a lot of people are interested in. I see people quoting things in files from NPR all the time. So it's not like it's turned into something that no one's interested in. If you do a good job running those things, it's something that the public, a lot of people will want to listen to and watch. And our view on the CBC is that it shouldn't be taking $1.6 billion of our tax dollars, which all of us have to pay for. It should convert to a privately funded model where they can do a very similar model to what those two entities do in the States, and raise money privately, and then have an appropriate budget based on that, and appropriate programming based on that.
So what would your party do in terms of Quebec separatism? Because I understand it's not as big of an issue as it was, but let's say if Quebec were to have another independence referendum, which I understand is illegal, but let's say if they were theoretically have one, what would your party's stance be on dealing with Quebec?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's one of those things that sort of ebbed and flowed in our history. It kind of goes away for a bit, and then it's had periods when it's come back. So I think it would be naive to assume that it would never come back. So it's obviously very possible that it could come up again. I think it revolves around our national plan for unity. I mean, I think the reason, one of the main reasons I was attracted to this party and attracted to running for the party, is the fact that there's fairness across the whole country. When you have things like equalization, where money's being taken from Alberta and Saskatchewan and being given to Quebec, it creates a situation where it's not fair, and you have their premier and New Brunswick's premier say they're willing to sit down and talk about how equalization might be reformed. So I think the best way to combat any kind of rise in separatism in Quebec is to make sure that that our policy across the entire country is fair, so that they can know that they're being treated fairly, that the same rules apply to them as everyone else, and they'll be allowed to proceed with their projects as well, just like the rest of the country, and I think it revolves around a message of unity and fairness. I think that's how we combat it.
That's great. So let's say if Quebec were to become independent, would the party respect the referendum or the result of it coming out, or?
I think. I mean, the last time it's interesting. I actually went to the campaign in Montreal in 1995 when this was voted on, and so it's yeah. I mean, we certainly wouldn't do anything to get in the way of democracy. I mean, if we ever get to the unfortunate situation of them expressing a strong will to leave, I don't think you would see a federal government interfere with that. But we would work very hard to make sure they're happy and not want to be in that position.
So another issue that sort of is related to that part of Canada is Newfoundland. So Newfoundland has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. There are high drug rates, high crime rates. What do you do to make life better in Newfoundland, let's say, for example, your party? Because Newfoundland is quite underdeveloped still.
Absolutely. So specifically on the energy projects that are out there that we believe that will provide a lot of employment. Energy East, again, when Quebec's saying that it can't happen, that really hurts the Atlantic provinces. And so they need to be in a position where they can develop their own projects. Best thing that could happen for Newfoundland is great business conditions and great energy projects. So we want to make sure that the federal government makes sure that they can proceed with those things. They obviously went through a period where when Alberta was doing very well, there were a lot of people leaving Newfoundland to go work in Alberta. We would like to create the kind of conditions that would drastically reduce unemployment and bring people back home. And I think it starts with the energy projects. It starts with reducing, it continues with reducing small business rates, reducing income tax, and creating conditions for businesses to thrive there again. I've had the pleasure of going there. There's wonderful people there. There's no reason why there can't be great economic conditions there.
So what will your party do to lower crime rates, and let's say particularly in terms of gun reform, what would your party do to lower crime rates and with guns?
Well, we believe that it's very important to make a distinction between the legitimate owners of guns and the criminal element of guns. You know, if you look at responsible gun owners, they are some of the most heavily scrutinized of our citizens. So their names have to go in a database. They're run against, RCMP and police records every single day, so that if you get into trouble with the law, you're going to immediately have your rights to own a gun revoked. And it deeply concerns me that when there's a rise in crime and there are gun incidents, politicians have a knee-jerk reaction and say all guns need to be removed. That's absolutely not what needs to happen. What needs to be happening is we need to be dealing with criminals. And one of the things that the federal government did was add more automation to the borders at our airports with regards to the Nexus Pass. And so we now know that there have been incidents with people taking advantage of that because there's far less scrutiny, because they assume with the Nexus Pass you've already been vetted by the NSA in the United States and the security.
Which is usually not the case, yeah.
And someone with a clean record, if it could be enticed with a large enough amount of money to bring illegal guns into the country. So that's something that I think has to be looked at again. You know, it's very convenient to come through the airport. I have a Nexus myself, and it's wonderful to use those machines and clear customs right away. But if someone has really bad intent, it unfortunately also creates a situation where they would be able to take advantage of that more easily, obviously taking a very high risk. So we know that there are illegal guns coming into the country. I also think that it's connected with the open borders policy that the Liberals have had with immigration. I think if you get back to focusing on economic immigration, you'll have people who are very keen to come here, very keen to work, very keen to contribute to the economy, and then you reduce the marginalization of communities. I grew up in Etobicoke. There's a Somalian community in sort of the north of that riding where they're feeling marginalized. They're not feeling like they're part of Canadian society. So we need to make sure that, again, with our message of unity, that everyone feels that they're a Canadian citizen, that everyone feels they have the same rights and the same chance to succeed.
So speaking of the border, which you just brought up, what would your party do to strengthen our border? Let's say, for example, closing the loopholes with
the safe third country agreement is ridiculous, because what you have is you have people landing in the United States and then walking across, in the example of Roxon Road, coming across from New York State, which I think we can all agree is not Rwanda, right? So I mean, it's being taken advantage of. That loophole absolutely has to be closed. We need to make the entire border a port of entry, because the whole reason they're going across that is because if they go to an airport, then they know they won't get into the country. So they know exactly how to get around the system. So we need to make the entire border a port of entry, so that there's whether you're walking or flying or whatever you happen to be doing, all the rules all the rules apply to everybody, everywhere, and also ending birth tourism. We've had examples of websites advertising to countries overseas saying, come and have your child in Canada, they'll automatically be a citizen. We need to end birth tourism as well.
So speaking of birth tourism, what is your party's official stance on birth tourism? You want to end it?
Get rid of it.
Get rid of it?
Yeah,
just
100%.
Get rid of it?
Clearly.
Get rid of it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Case
So it's
closed.
an issue, yeah?
Yeah.
Case closed, nothing more?
Yeah.
Another question that I have is related to sort of dealing with Mexico. What about Canadian-Mexican relations?
I mean, it's less talked about, because in sort of the North American trade agreements, I mean, it's the states usually has a political focus on what's going to Mexico and jobs that are going to Mexico, but we would like, as I said earlier, freer trade with everybody. In the case of agricultural products, avocados are something that's enjoyed by a lot of Canadians, but the cost is quite high. We want to have the same kind of good relationship with them that we do with everybody else. There are a lot of Mexicans who have come here as temporary foreign workers. They're very hard workers. They've contributed greatly to our agriculture. I have good friends myself who are Mexican who have become citizens. They contribute a lot to the country, and there's no reason we can't have a great relationship with them and a very good free trade agreement with them.
So another question that I have is, in terms of LGBTQ rights, what would your party do? Would they protect LGBTQ rights, or would they expand them? What would they do in relation to the LGBTQ community?
Well, of course, because our view is that everyone has the same rights, and that means that there can't, and if everybody has the same rights, the logical step after that is you have to ensure that there's no discrimination. So if there is discrimination, that means that people's rights are being violated. But the way that you handle that is and again, I think the best document on this was the Bill of Rights that Diefenbaker put in 1960, which basically said that if you're a Canadian, you have the same rights. So if you notice in that document, it says like nothing about skin color, nothing about sexual orientation, nothing about gender, and also nothing about whether you're a newer Canadian or multi-generational Canadian. And that's how you make sure that everyone has the same rights. And if there's any violation of those, you move quickly to make sure that there is no discrimination. I think that's the best path to protecting everybody's rights.
Yeah, and then another question I have is in relation to dealing with Donald Trump. So what would your party do dealing with Donald Trump? I know we've already talked about dealing with NAFTA and all that, but what would your party do directly to deal with Donald Trump? What are your personal thoughts on President Trump?
Yeah, I mean, it's as I mentioned earlier, he's obviously given every country that deals with the United States, which of course is everybody, is a very unique and problematic challenge. And I think it's a case where, I read a book, Ronan Farrow, who used to work for their State Department. He talks in that book about how the States has moved away over multiple administrations from diplomacy. And what I would want to do primarily is although we don't generally think of having a diplomatic problem with the United States, but I'd really like to strengthen that. I think that's something that we should be doing around the world with everybody. He's obviously I think the world has seen that he's a volatile figure. He's impulsive. He's prone to I mentioned earlier about China, where he's if he gets upset about something, is he says, okay, we need more tariffs. That's a very tough thing to deal with. But I think the way I would approach that is to, if you look actually at the trade negotiations with him, more with Robert Lighthizer, obviously with their U.S. as the U.S. trade representative. But we need to remind them that the economic relationship with the two countries is critically important. And we don't want to do anything to damage that. So I think we have to get away from the sort of the bluster and the abuse and kind of not respond. You know, my big thing with that, and we're sort of going through that a bit with this campaign too, with like things like trolling. If he says things that are aggressive or a little bit, I think it's best to not go down to that level. And just keep it at, you have to keep in mind that there are a lot of people in that government who are adults. Robert Lighthizer is a guy who wants to talk seriously about trade. I think you deal with those people, you work with the people who are going to have a mature and responsible discussion, and keep the relationship going behind the scenes, even if the president does create challenges.
Yeah. Another question that I sort of have is related to university fees. What would your party do to help make the university more affordable for students? Would that be a provincial responsibility or a federal responsibility?
It's provincial would be the main jurisdiction, but again, I think it's one of those things where that's why we're very keen to balance the budget, because on things like this, to make sure when we will clearly need a number of social programs, that may be one, because of course we want people to get the best education they can. But again, I think that mostly would be a provincial thing that they need to look at.
Yeah. And then in terms of childcare, because that is a big issue here within Don Valley West, you have a lot of young families that have trouble affording proper childcare. What would your party do to bring about proper childcare, like affordable, quality childcare?
We don't have anything official on that, but I think that would fall into the same category with regards to if we want to be in a position to fund that, it needs fiscal responsibility first. And so that will allow programs like that to be funded, which are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then another question I have is in terms of related to energy. So would your party still use solar energy, or would you scrap, like, let's say solar energy, wind energy, ocean energy? I've seen like hydro energy. What would your party do on that, particularly hydro energy?
Well, it's a topic I'm really interested in, because as an engineer, the cost of renewables has continued to come down, which of course
is great.
It is great, and it makes them more and more competitive. And I watched, for example, a really interesting documentary on thorium reactors. So a lot of people don't know this, but the CANDU nuclear system that we're obviously very proud of as a country, that technology is very dated at this point. And those reactors are actually only 0.5% efficient from an end-to-end energy perspective. So there are things like wave reactors, thorium reactors that can be built on a much lower scale. I would absolutely encourage the development of renewables. It's very interesting technology. I'm a very big fan of solar myself.
Yeah.
I think solar can go on a lot of, it's funny, it's funny with solar, because people always say, it'll take up land, but it doesn't need to take up land. It can go on buildings.
It can go on your roof, yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So, I think, and we've actually seen a lot of the public housing in downtown Toronto install solar, which I think is great. It's just like computing. It becomes more and more efficient. It becomes cheaper over time. And it's growing, and it should keep growing. And you'll see renewables become more and more competitive, which will allow their growth, which I think is a very good thing.
So does your party have an official stance on nuclear energy? Would you expand it, or?
We do not. But again, from my perspective as an engineer, there are very exciting technologies that are coming, and I don't see any reason why we would do anything other than try to grow those.
Yeah, try and grow those. Okay.
Yeah,
that's a great question. Another question that I have is sort of related to, let's say, dealing with protecting our oceans. What do you do to protect our oceans from oil spills and protecting them?
Well,
having clean air and stuff like that.
It's critically important, and we have a lot of federal regulation around that. So even if you look at the case of Trans Mountain and where it would be received in the ports and how those ports would function, we have a lot of federal regulation that takes care of the environment. We have clean air and clean water central in our platform. It's already written in our platform, and we would not move away from a regulatory perspective of abolishing rules that would endanger those things. We think those things are very important to have.
So I like to keep mentioning during the interview saying that you like small government. So what would you do yourself to make the Canadian government smaller? Do you think Maxime Bernier is the perfect outlet to do that?
We do, because we're taking, as I mentioned on foreign aid, as I mentioned on CBC, crony capitalism. We're the only party that will stop crony capitalism of the main parties, and that by definition will get us to budget balance, which will then reduce tax. We're not looking to slash the government.
Yeah,
We think
absolutely,
there are particular. Our problem is with particular programs and the billions that are being wasted on things that don't help Canadians.
Yeah.
And so that's what's important to us.
So dealing with crony capitalism, I'm vaguely familiar with the term myself, but for those who don't know what it is, what exactly is crony capitalism? So people think of S&C law, but what is crony capitalism exactly?
Federal government picking and choosing various companies to give billions of dollars to. And the argument that the way they try to spin it is that it's about jobs. It's not about jobs, not in the least. In the case of SNC Lavalin and Bombardier, those are both publicly traded firms. They have access to credit markets and equity markets. Their responsibility is to raise money themselves. SNC, even after being given billions of dollars, has had horrible results. They've been sanctioned around the world. They've had dodgy dealings in Libya. Their management's acted completely irresponsibly, and now their stock is suffering and their results are suffering. So it is not government's job to pick economic winners and losers. It's not government's job to pick businesses. It's being done for political donations, and it's being done for vote buying, and it has to stop.
Yeah, so what else would your party do in terms of dealing with Senate reform? Let's say, would your party reform the Senate at all, or abolish it? What would your party do?
There's nothing, we don't have an official stance on that, but again, I think that's something that would probably be brought forward by one of our members.
Pretty soon, yeah.
I personally would like to see it elected myself, but there'll be different views within the party.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing about the party is we're allowed to have different views.
Which is great, yeah, I can understand that, yeah. So in terms of funding political parties in Canada, what would your party do with that exactly, funding political parties, like third parties such as yourself?
Well, I think a major step forward in the Gomery inquiry, which prevented corporations from donating to federal parties. I think that's the right step.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know Ontario was looking at this approximately 2 years ago. I remember it being discussed in the Ontario legislature. I think the provinces should take the exact same step. I think if you look at the problems the United States has, where a lot of corporate lobbying, sort of seems to be running the whole show, that moves democracy away from people and gets it into the realm of money. So I think anything that we can do to make sure that it's about people and individual votes and not about money is the correct path. And I think I would certainly maintain the idea that corporations should not ever be able to donate to political parties. I believe very strongly in
that. So in terms of talking about housing again, so houses in Leaside, they're usually worth in millions. Mine's probably, I don't know how much it is. What would your party do to bring about more affordable housing for Canadians? What do you think of Trudeau promised, or one of his promises, to put a 1% tax on foreigners that buy houses? What would your party do to allow Canadians to buy more affordable housing and to prevent foreign people from buying too many houses in Canada?
Well, on the website Greater Fool, which is run by Garth Turner, who's a former MP, of course, it's a website that's predominantly about housing, and we've proven over and over again on that website with all kinds of data that the effect of immigration on housing, it is a factor, but it's a small factor. It's at the margins. The main thing that's caused the lack of affordability is the central bank's zero interest rate policy, which has made an extraordinary housing bubble. So we disagree with the Liberals' plan to obviously tax things more, but they're also effectively going to subsidize people buying into the current level of housing, which I think is very dangerous. I said on Twitter yesterday that it will lead to more bankruptcies and it will lead to more federal debt, because they're going to basically subsidize. It's equivalent to the federal government subsidizing people buying into the stock market in December of 1999, right before it collapses. It's the same idea.
Yeah, the dot-com bubble.
Yeah. So the steps I would take is along the lines of reducing the leverage level that people can get with mortgages. I think that needs to be very, very, Jim Flaherty had started that process, but I think it needs to continue. It needs to continue because there's far too much debt that's being used in housing. I think it should be at a much, much more restrictive level to prevent, which would clearly make it more affordable and also and reduce the risk for individuals.
An interesting thing I've seen New Zealand do is sort of put a 15% tax on foreigners buying houses. So would your party do something similar to that with foreigners buying houses, or what would your party do?
I don't agree with that. I think from a free market perspective, it's again, I think that's often used as a political tool and sort of like a xenophobic tool. I don't agree with it. We've shown even in British Columbia, because there are a lot of people who have the idea that foreign Chinese have come in and that's why the property values are so high. But we've proven with the data that's like in the neighborhood of like 1.6% of an effect.
1.6. I didn't know
it's mostly because of Canadians being able to go to the bank and seeing a 2.2% interest rate, 2.5 years ago, and then not having any idea that borrowing $800,000 might be taking on significant risk. That's really why we have a house.
So what is your party's stance on the Quebec? You have the recent bill that banned the use of the hijab, the yarmulke, and any other sort of religious symbol in public service. What would your party do? Would you interfere in that case, or would you just leave Quebec alone to do its own thing in regards to that?
Yeah, I think the province, that's up to the democracy within the province to decide. They chose the CAQ party. Presumably they ran on that. I have to confess I don't know, but
Me neither.
if the public eventually feels that that's the wrong direction, they'll have the opportunity provincially to change their government.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what would your party also do in terms of, let's say, in terms of development in Canada? So what would you do to grow our tech sector, for example, here in Toronto? Because that's a very big sector that's growing.
Well, you want to create the absolute best conditions you can for small business and entrepreneurialism and research and development. And the way to do that is with our platform, because you need to get back to a budget balance right away. We're going to drastically reduce the small business. We will have the lowest small business tax of any of the parties. We'll have the lowest larger corporate tax of any of the parties. We will abolish capital gains tax. All those things will make sure that entrepreneurs have the best chance of succeeding, and you will see innovation thrive when we do that.
So speaking of small businesses, how low would you lower the taxes for small businesses? Because that is a big issue within Leaside here or Don Valley West, small businesses. So what would your party do for small businesses to help improve their growth?
So when Maxime campaigned for the CPC leadership, there were financial details at the time, and right now, from a small business tax perspective, which is a business earning income under $500,000, the level that's being talked about now is 9%, and 9% is the current rate, right? But so our full fiscal plan, right now we're using the fiscal plan that Max campaigned on, with the capital gains that I mentioned and so forth, but the small business tax rate, when we formally announce it, will be less than any of the other parties.
Okay. So, speaking of Maxime Bernier, how do you feel about him not being able to participate in the debates? Do you feel the media has betrayed your party unfairly, or what do you think can be done to have your party more positive light in the media?
It's a sad comment on the state of our democracy, because I think, again, going back to the bigotry question, right? I think people should be able to hear the views of everyone and then make a decision for themselves. We've always taken the position that we are out to earn people's trust and earn people's vote. We don't have the arrogance that says, of course you vote for us, or of course you should hear for us. We want to make sure that Canadians hear a message, and then in an informed position to make a decision for themselves. And I think we were down protesting the Maclean's debate. This is City TV on Thursday night.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which Maxime was excluded from. And I organized that, and we were glad to be there, because we think it's outrageous that a sitting prime minister would refuse to show up, and that our party wouldn't even be invited. We have close to 45,000 members, probably at this point. There's just no reason on earth we shouldn't be at the debates, and so Monday will be the biggest day for our party yet, when we find out whether we're in the national or not.
Exactly. Yeah. So talking of Andrew Scheer, what does your party think about him? Because you feel like he's gone away from traditional conservatism. What are your party's thoughts on Andrew Scheer, let's say, for example?
Well, I mean, it seems, from my perspective anyway, like what they're trying to do in this election cycle is basically imitate the Liberals. And he's in favor of supply management, which is central planning. It's not a free market principle. He's saying to Canadians that he's okay with them overpaying for groceries to the tune of $4 billion a year. they're unable to balance the budget in 5 years, which is ridiculous. We're heading into a recession, which means they don't have a plan to fiscally balance. They'll never get rid of crony capitalism. They'll keep doing the same things that the Liberals do. They rant and rave about SNC-Lavalin, but the reality is that if they were the government at this time, they'd be doing the same things. They always have. Harper gave $400 million to a venture capital fund. That's not the federal government's job. That's for the private sector to be doing. He's going after a UN Security Council seat. He refuses to say what immigration levels should be at. Their platform is an absolute joke.
Exactly. I think we can both agree upon that. And then another question I have is in relation to, let's say, dealing with the agricultural sector. So you get rid of supply management. What else would you do to make lives better for farmers? Because rural people do still struggle with proper access to healthcare, getting fair economic opportunities. So what would your party do in terms of dealing with economic opportunity and healthcare for rural voters?
Well, the contribution that agriculture has made to this country is absolutely enormous, right? But again, we will reduce the farm tax. So that will come out when we have our full fiscal plan, but our farm tax will be the lowest of any of the parties. And as I mentioned earlier, for those who are involved in supply management, we'll have a very clear plan to treat them fairly, make sure they continue to thrive, and do the great work they have for the people in the urban areas that our farmers have always done for the country. They will be treated extremely well under a PBC platform.
And then speaking of sort of something related to that, what would your party do in terms of relation to, I can't think, I had it in my mind, what would your party do in terms of relation to the lumbering industry? So there's a lot of tariffs on there. Would you expand it, or what would you do to protect it from foreign interest?
I think we have a lot of exports in that area. I think we should be actively negotiating with all countries we trade with to make sure that we get to a freer trade path so that they can have more access to markets. The fewer tariffs that are applied, softwood lumber has obviously come up multiple times in the last 2 decades. Our exports to the United States, we need to be negotiating with all these countries to ensure that if we can get to an agreement on ideally eventually zero tariffs, the markets for our lumber will expand dramatically. That's a great asset that Canada has.
I just remember the question now. So what does your party think of something like a universal income? So I've seen down in the United States, there's a guy named Andrew Yang running for presidency. Yep. He's going on about universal income. Would your party be in favor of something like that, or no?
Well, we don't have an official position on it, but it's something I think about quite a bit because, again, coming from a background of automation, because what I believe will happen that a lot of people don't seem to be too dialed into is I think automation will arrive very, very quickly. And, as that will clearly have an effect on employment, because what it does is it raises the standard of the skills that people have to have so as an example, to go from doing manual labor to being a robotic technician, that's a different skill set. So it continues to raise the bar of the skills that are going to be needed, and my belief is that some form of universal basic income will be inevitable. I don't think there's any way around it, because I think there will be a day in the not too distant future where unemployment climbs above 10% and 20% and so forth. And by the way, that's also a very important reason to look at immigration levels, because the traditional idea in economics that immigration should be at 1%, applied when many decades ago when a lot more work was being done through manual labor. So you had to have a steady supply of effectively like able-bodied young men in order to do work on the farms and in factories and so forth. But of course these days that's all automated. And so if you think about the idea that automation would continue to rise, I think it's absolutely a factor for immigration levels, because if we get to this scenario we're talking about where universal basic income will be needed, you actually will want to have as few people in your country as possible, not as many.
So speaking of automation, what would your party do to prevent automation from overtaking all our jobs? Because that's sort of a fear that people have in the manufacturing sector. What would your party do to prevent too much automation?
Well, again, I think it would. The main factor in that, in my opinion, is minimum wage, which is a provincial issue. I don't think there should be one. Because,
so it's the provincial issue?
It will put people out of work. It's like clear that's what it does. So, but from a federal perspective, we wouldn't... that's going to happen, right? That's going to happen through development. I think it would be a very bad idea to try to restrict it because we would lose competitiveness. But we have to think very clearly about how we are going to then take care of the people who can't work, right?
Yeah.
Which again, I think goes back to fiscal responsibility.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
Those are all the questions I had anyway.
Terrific.
Yeah, you got it.
Terrific.
All right, thank you so
very
much, Ian. Yeah,
Yep.
I'll get that up soon. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me